anyone else struggle with control? Like we simultaneously want a break, some room to breathe, a little less on our plates, yet we keep saying yes to anything that comes our way. Never ask for help, and if and when we do, we either micromanage, correct, or criticize the person trying to help, only leading us back to taking the wheel we keep complaining about holding in the first place. But to what extent? To prove we can? Trying to control everything around us is only disrupting the relationships and connections that we can build with others and anchors our self-worth on doing rather than being. We try to control the world around us while avoiding taking control of what is inside, our thoughts, feelings, unresolved pain, and distress. And at some point, it's going to come back to haunt us. Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Kyira Wackett. Thanks for joining me for another video as we work to empower and equip you with the confidence and skills to write your own story so that you can live your life on purpose. Today we're going to talk about our relationship with control. Now, before we dive in, I want to put a quick plug to check out the link in the show notes to my program all about control called Liberated Living. It's a 3-session work group limited to 8 people that only runs in the spring and fall, and the fall group just opened. Check out the link in the show notes to learn more and be sure to snag your spot early so you don't miss out and you can get that early bird pricing. And if you're not sure if you need this or if it would be a good fit for you, see how you feel at the end of this video, because this is just a taste of the work that we're gonna be doing in this program. All right, now let's get into it. The overemphasis on trying to control or manage these factors is, no surprise here, a product of shame and low self-efficacy. It goes back to the idea of feeling as though it's our responsibility to take care of everyone and everything, creating this false sense of power and control that ultimately keeps us trapped. You have to be able to do and handle it all, but the it is incredibly misdirected and externally anchored to focus on people and circumstances outside of us and our control. So where does this leave us? Trapped inside of what's referred to as the drama triangle, where you're constantly oscillating between feeling like you're responsible for everything, the problem in every situation, and yet can control nothing in your life. Now, side note, I have an awesome podcast episode on the drama triangle that I'll include a link to in the show notes because wow, is this information a game changer on understanding our behavior. Now, when we find ourselves here, the work we need to do to accomplish our goals is simply going to be out of reach. But no matter how much we want to or are excited for and about our goals, dismantling ourselves from this storyline can be incredibly difficult. I mean, think about it. You have spent decades operating under false assumptions and pressures. And as we've seen throughout our work and any of the videos that you've watched, your own journey to shame resilience, things aren't going to go away overnight. It takes a significant amount of time and energy to even allow the possibility that we can't control or aren't responsible for X, let alone let it go entirely. Now, I know this is one more thing I'm telling you can't be fixed. That's because life is constantly changing. We're growing and evolving, and who we are evolves as context and experience deepens. Recognizing every cue for shame or creating barriers that impede it from coming in is nearly impossible. You can't change that fact. You just get to decide what you do with it. And in our case, we're working to control what we can inside of this reality. From here, we can find a direct path towards living our most purposeful and authentic life. And much of this is going to lie in our ability to hold on to that familiar question, why? Why do you have to be able to do it all? Why do you need to be liked by everyone? Why do they need to understand? Why do you have to do and be X at all times or manage everything for everyone else? And to what end? What's the cost-benefit analysis of this hyperfixation? Where does it leave you? Now, to do this work, we're going to move through 2 sections, clarifying what is and what is not in our control. Now, the first section is going to focus on letting go or naming everything we don't have control over, and then beginning the work to release those thoughts, pressures, and assumptions from our story. So to make this work easier for you, I've included a link to a handout that walks you through an exercise called the control wheel, which will help you complete both parts of this work. But you can also get a sheet of paper and label one side out of my control and the other side in my control. Now, starting with what's outside of your control, begin to list everything that comes to mind. Now, I want you to be as exhaustive as possible here. Consider the weather, other people, your past or future, circumstances like traffic or global events. Ask yourself, are you holding on to emotions from your past that are no longer serving you? Did something happen that affected you that's out of your control, and holding on to it, while it gives you a sense of power in your feeling, is ultimately doing nothing but keeping you stuck? Now, what role does holding on to these serve you, truly? Where are you spending your precious resources, time and energy, on trying to control how other people think and feel about you or other things, when you ultimately have no ability to change that? And where are you getting lost, perseverating about future anxieties outside of your control? Now, once you've developed your, what I'm assuming is going to be an exhaustive list, we're going to start to reflect on the following. What does holding on to these things do for you? Positive, negative, and neutral. Specifically, what role can and does it play in your work to getting to this future self you're so committed to working towards? So, for example, is trying to ensure that your boss thinks that you're committed to your work and willing it to give it your all going to get in the way of you setting boundaries with your time and energy so that you don't lose sight of other roles and priorities? Second, what do you need from yourself or others to let these things go? Now, we'll be very intentional here that we focus on needs that are attainable and in our control. So, for example, you might think, I can't control what happened in my past with my friend and I have to let it go. When you consider what you need, you might say, I can't let go of what they did until they acknowledge what they did and they apologize to me. So I want you to see, where is the rub here? We're trading in one out of control piece for another. We can't control whether or not they ever apologize or see what they did or didn't do is wrong. That's also out of our control. What is in our control is to reflect on what holding on to this pain or this old story does to and for us, and what it would look like to let it go, knowing we might never feel like we get the resolution that we wanted or told ourselves we needed. Now, I know that part's painful, and it's necessary. Now, this is the work of the forgiveness process, and for those stickier and trickier situations that we find ourselves having a hard time letting go, put a pin in them and then dive deeper into some of the forgiveness resources that I linked to below when you're ready. Now, finally, I want you to reflect on what choices need to be made as a result of what comes out of this work. So for an example, maybe as we look at your relationship with your sibling or your parent, we see many dynamics that we are addressing are out of our control and we need and want to work on letting go of. Perhaps we start to see a theme and that we aren't getting what we want and there's a lot we need that's also lacking. We may begin to see that we don't feel seen, safe, and heard within the relationship, or that this relationship exists entirely based on your maintaining a role or performance within it. As we consider roles in relationships, we need to ask ourselves if the data is pointing us in a direction that says we need to make a change. Now, radical acceptance can easily get caught up in shame, and that we'll just start telling ourselves to accept less, or that this is what we deserve or we can get. That's the opposite of this work. Radical acceptance is also about distinguishing what we can and cannot control and knowing what we're worth. Now, this first part of the work is going to feel like a lot, and I want you to be kind to yourself in the process. You might feel a lot of resistance and overwhelm. I mean, the first time that I did it, I remember feeling like I couldn't control anything and all of my relationships were terrible. I almost felt numb as I sat in space thinking about this and its impact. Now, those thoughts are valid. And they're not true. For most of us, we are deeply rooted to our shame stories, leaving us feeling both responsible for and yet incapable of controlling anything and like we're constantly failing. So a lot of work is going to present itself here. That doesn't mean that you are without love and connection, or that you have no control, or that you won't feel anchored in your life again. It just means we have to allow you to feel out of control long enough to land in a much more supportive and self-sufficient place. Okay, once you've done this, now again, it's going to take time, not just in one sitting, but as you finish that and you're ready for part 2, we're going to start focusing on what's in your control. Now, this part's going to help you with that sense of re-anchoring yourself. I like to think about this in 2 ways. First, I think about simply my own actions, boundaries, relationships with others, stories, and myself, and begin to make my list. Then I like to look at my out of control list and ask myself what I can control about those situations. Now, the biggest thing that comes up for me is often the reality that how I respond to or build context around a story, experience, or feeling is the biggest thing I can control. Now, similarly, once you've done that, it's time for some reflection over here. So I want you to ask yourself, what effect would shifting your focus to these areas have on your overall mood, energy, sense of self, and even time? For example, if I spent less time ruminating on whether or not someone likes me, I'd free up time to enjoy relationships I'm in or make choices more freely about how I show up. Second, how will it impact your focus and progress regarding your dreams, needs, and goals? An example being, if I worried less about hurting other people's feelings by setting a boundary, I might take better care of my own needs and limits, which will in turn allow me to have healthier relationships with those and other people. Third, how will it affect your interpersonal relationships? So for example, I think a lot about how the tension that has and still exists within me in my personal and sometimes professional relationships is a result of the expectations I have or put on myself and or others for how we are supposed to show up and engage in a relationship. When I learn to accept that I can't control other people, how they act, respond, etc., and that people are who they are, then I can accept that I have the right to engage with them in a way that supports my values, as well as maintains my mental, emotional, and physical needs and safety. Now, this includes letting go of anger when they don't do or say what I want, handle something different from how I would, or are stuck in a storyline that I don't want to support or be a part of. This also helps me relinquish the idea that their sense of emotional and mental well-being rests on me. Now ask yourself, what scares you about acknowledging your role and control here? What resistance do you feel coming up? Often fixating on what is out of our control is the perfect avoidance strategy that keeps many of us stuck in shame, pain, and blame. And finally, what do you need to feel confident in assuming control of these pieces? Now, as you go through this part of the process, I do want to point out a few general radical acceptance points that fall into that control category that are essential to hold space for. So first, you do have a choice. Sure, maybe it isn't always direct, but you do have one. And that's not a choice of resolve or about perpetuating stigmas such as the BS beliefs that everyone can have a size 2 body or make 6 figures if they just worked hard enough. Those are shame-driven rules. I mean here that we still get to choose how we respond to our life circumstances. We choose our mindset. We can choose not to give our power or time to people and situations that don't serve us, and we can name the fact that some things are not okay or that we deserve better. Second, you are not responsible for other people's happiness or well-being, no matter how much they try to sell you on this idea. You can't control that, and when you prioritize that, you relinquish the one person's well-being in your control, your own. Third, you will never feel ready. That's not a destination point we'll land on when it comes to this work, but you can control the fact that you have the ability and right to do it anyway. And finally, self-care is not a choice. It's not optional, a luxury, or low priority. It's a crucial necessity. You can't live the life you want and keep burning the candle at both ends. Athletes can't reach peak performance without days off or time spent stretching or taking care of their body. Think of this work as your life training. Self-care is your way of replenishing your energy and taking back time for yourself. Whew, okay. Anyone else already feel like this is a lot before you've even dove into the material? That's because it is. This is one of the biggest action steps in the entire shame resilience process, and that this is all about focusing and letting go of control. Grief and loss and pain and distress are associated in all of this. Learning to let go is scary. It leaves you feeling vulnerable, and it's super important that you remind yourself vulnerability is not a sign you are unsafe or at risk. You are simply healing. Once you do the work, be sure to come back to the comments and let us know one thing that's sticking with you, either from a space of enlightenment or resistance, so we can build support around you and your journey. If you found today's episode valuable and insightful, I encourage you to hit that thumbs up, click subscribe, and of course, share this episode with someone you think could benefit from hearing it. If you're ready to take that next step in your own shame resilience journey, be sure to click the link in my show notes to download my free handout, 5 things shame resilient people do every day and 3 things they don't. Also, be sure to check out the link in the show notes for my program, Liberated Living, which is a 3-session work group with only 8 spots available that helps you take a deep dive into the process of radical acceptance, responsibility, and authorship to help you gain more momentum, insight, and clarity in your shame resilience journey. And if you're also looking for more ways to connect, you'll find links to my website, email list, and podcast below, as well as a link to set up a discovery call to go over any questions that you have or talk about how my programming might support you in your journey. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Remember, you have the right to author your own story. So let's go get that pen back. I'll see you next time.